This episode brought to you by Nicholson Realty 2.0 and Chuck's Sewer, Drain, and Plumbing. Conrad, this is Garage Talk. Let's go.
I'm Ted. Let's rock and roll with our special guest today.
How we doing, Mr. Braden Bushman?
I'm doing really well. Glad to be on, fellas.
Hey, do us all a favor, man, and give us your background.
Where do you want to start? That's a loaded question, man. A loaded question.
Conception. No, I'm kidding.
Well, I'm a Texas native, and I was born and semi-raised in Seguin, Texas, just outside of San Antonio. And when I moved to Indiana, I think I was about 8 or 9 years old. Parents moved back to that area. My mother and father are both from Marion. I went to Marion High School, and so once economy was tight in the early '80s, back in those days it was tough, and parents decided to relocate, come back up to their hometown, be closer to family, and that's how I got to go to Gas City. My grandmother lived in Gas City, and White Oaks Trailer Park, the famous White Oaks Trailer Park, and so I moved there when I was 8 or 9 years old, going to second grade, and then obviously going through high school to the Mississinewa School District, and went on to fortunately play basketball at Wright State University, and made a short stint over to Virginia for a little bit, lived there for a little bit, and then moved back to Dayton, Ohio when I was in 2011. I've been here ever since. So currently doing selling medical devices and being a dad, being a husband, high school basketball coach, entrepreneur, business owner, CEO. It's a lot, but very, very, very blessed to be where I am today. And a lot of
Which
people
one
to
of
thank
those is
for
the
that.
hardest job?
Ooh. I think being a dad, I think it's the most challenging thing that I've done in my life. The most rewarding by far, but also most challenging. I have 5 kids, and the oldest being at University of Kentucky. She's a junior and studying business marketing, and we just enjoyed her event down in UK this past weekend on Saturday. She had something called Greek Sing, and she's a leader in her sorority and her Theta sorority, and they do this dance competition and raise money, and I think that they raised $100,000 for Make-A-Wish Foundation, and she was one of the leaders in that piece of it. So that was neat to go see and be a part of that. Her other daughter's playing Division II college basketball. Was at Tribeca in Nashville, Tennessee, and she's in the transfer portal now, and she's trying to manage that piece of it. And then junior daughter at Franklin, Tennessee, and Page High School, and our son's a sophomore at Beaver Creek High School here in Dayton, Ohio, and I coach him. Been coaching him for a long time, since he's about 6 years old, and then I have my youngest daughter's 8, who's she's she's an athlete, Ted, and
Wow.
you saw me grow up, but but our son's played varsity basketball as a sophomore on a top 5 team in the state, and we
Wow.
lost on us the regional semifinals, and won our first district in 25 years. And so it was fun to coach him and really get that piece of it. And he's playing varsity baseball now as a first baseman, and he travels a lot for summer baseball. We're pretty much in Georgia and Florida and Alabama all summer. So
Oh, wow.
and then our youngest one's now playing AAU, and she's in that role. And so it's I think, to answer your question, I think the most challenging piece is just being there, being present, and giving those advice. But man, we have hit a home run with all 5 of them, man. They
Yep.
just doing really well, and really successful in what they're trying to do. They're all, the ones that are looking at business and marketing and as their future careers, and get into the same type of career path that I've been in. And so it's just fun to watch, but being spread thin is and all the distractions and all the sideways paths that they can take in this generation. And there's just so much distraction from what they encounter every day. So that would probably be the most challenging piece, but they all have their own rewards and their own challenges in itself.
Well, like you say, the distractions of today are a lot different. We didn't have that stuff. You didn't have that stuff
No.
growing up. I mean,
Being an adolescence is tough enough as it is.
Yeah, yeah. I think the distractions from the social media and things that they have going on, and the pressure that they have on, just from a sports standpoint, academic. All of our kids have done really well academically, and the pressure of that now is, our son, all of our daughters took college prep courses, and it's nice as a benefit because they can get out of college earlier and
Hmm.
save some of that tuition cost. But for them to be it, our son's taking college courses as a sophomore,
Yeah.
and so it just speeds up the process. And I think there's some things lost in that piece of it too, right? Some of my high school memories were some of the greatest memories I have growing
Right.
up, and the community that we grew up in. And
Hmm.
they were just, I felt we were really fortunate in the generation we grew up in,
Right.
just for that sense of it. And now it's just they've put the childhood on a sped up level, and
Right.
so they're losing some of those experiences that we got to experience when we were kids.
That's true, and that's like you said. You're always proud of your kids and their athletic accolades, but you're more proud of the people they turn out to be.
Yeah, that's my, I try to tell these young kids, and we've done well financially, and my wife and I have been very successful. My wife, she's somebody that just is just phenomenal in herself, and blessed to have her in my life, and to push us every day and run our household, and make sure we're all where we're supposed to be from a scheduling standpoint. And she works as well, and she's in sales and has had just a tremendous career in sales as well. So, you know, to have somebody like that just kind of help, be it the motherly piece of it, but also working and manage our house. I mean, it's challenging.
Right.
Pretty much our society is a two income society now.
Yep.
Before, you could get away with one income. It's just
Right.
it's more challenging now, especially when you got to put some kids through college and things like that. It's that two income piece, and you got to try to figure out how to manage a house with the schedule that go on. So, but
Right.
but blessed where we're at. So very fortunate.
Yeah. That's awesome. I mean, that just, you know, I don't know. I can't say enough, from what I know, from what I remember from you, and just the way you've turned out. I'm proud of you. Everybody around here is.
Yeah, it's I always say I didn't do it by myself, Ted.
Right.
They're man, guests, I had opportunity to go to Marion. I had opportunity to go to Oak Hill, and my
Hmm.
mom lived in Marion. She had a Marion address, and the people in the community that helped me get to where I'm at. I still am forever indebted to them.
Right.
It's
Yep.
obviously that I had a path that I could have went sideways real
Hmm.
easy, and from that piece of it. But and everybody kind of knows the story about my dad, and it was him and I, and he was a
Hmm.
bachelor, and I didn't have a lot of structure. I had pretty much free range of whatever I wanted to do. But that's not to say that my dad wasn't my greatest teacher.
Right. Right.
I think everybody that you cross your path with is somebody that you can learn from, right? And
Hmm.
so, my dad always, my dad had his ways and his things that he wanted to do, and but he always he gave me the choice,
Hmm.
and he always said choices have benefits or consequences,
Right.
and you can do what you want to do with it. Here's the money I'm giving you, and what path you want to go down. And so he was a great teacher, and he taught me a lot of things of what not to do. But,
Hmm.
but there was also things that my dad was tough.
Right.
My dad was a tough guy, and just wasn't afraid of conflict if it arose. And he had a lot of confidence about himself,
Hmm.
and never really started problems, but if
Right.
they came, he showed me that type of toughness. But he also showed me a lot of respect. And there's times that that I had to give respect to the people that were around me, and there's things that he required of me, even though that sometimes he was on a little rougher side. So really thankful for having him in my life. It wasn't perfect, by all means. It
Right.
was
Right.
challenging, but on top of that I had, man, just the people in the community, man, the Swanners, the Simmons family, Ted, yourself, you and Paige, I there's just so many, the Lynn family, the McPherson family, Coach McPherson, all these people, all these men just were there and surrounded me. And it's almost like they wouldn't let me fail. Like
Right.
there was such a cushion around me that they saw such a spotlight and the ability for me to, to be successful. I'm forever indebted to those guys that, Coach Ritchie and Coach McPherson. I mean, just all these guys, Coach Vince Lorenzano and the
Hmm.
teachers, Tad McKenzie, Mike Powell, man, just all these people that just surrounded themselves with me as a bubble and just really helped me be successful in life. So forever indebted and so thankful for them. And I want those people to hear, and I'm leaving a lot of people out, but they know who they are, and if they hear this podcast, I just want them to know that those thoughts don't ever leave my mind. I'm
Right.
forever, and great, grateful that they were impacting my life. So
Mhm.
really fortunate on that side.
Life is definitely full of choices, and uh, you know, having people cross paths is a blessing. I've been fortunate. I could also went sideways, man. Um, some of those people you mentioned, yeah, those are the kind of guys they were. They didn't want you to go that way. They
Right.
took pride and they seen something in you of value, and they knew that it had nothing else to do with but making you uh, become a better person.
It's right. I can't, and also the friend group that I had, the friend
Oh
group
yeah.
from, our classes, and, it's crazy. A guy that I give a shout out, because I never would have thought Brandon Swanner would have been a school administrator. Like that's just not, the path that I thought he would have ever taken. But man, I tell you, you want to talk about somebody that just taught me how to compete, man. He was a guy that I respected for a long time. And, we had our things growing up and, his brother Jake was, within my class. And so we were always around each other, but, he was just a, tremendous competitor. And then you had the Liddick family and,
Hmm.
you had these guys that came before me and from the athletic side that I just really looked up to. Eric Skeens was a big time player and, Pete Watson, Chance Young. And, that was the early generation that
Yeah.
I got to see kind of growing up through middle school. And, Nick Veter was a senior when I was a freshman and his leadership and, his work ethic and things like that I got to see firsthand early on, was something that I needed. But, Brandon was an ultimate competitor. I mean, he wasn't afraid to anybody on the court and his game was he really facilitated but he was a guy that just lived life at the time but man, you get him on the basketball court, man, he was a dog. And
Hmm.
I just love that competitive edge about him. Then you had Jake, who's a great shooter. Then my peer group of Brody, Tyler Plank, and those guys that Matt Plank was my coach in my my in middle school. Mickey
Right.
McPherson, Denny Smith, all those guys just, man, it was such a special time. And not to mention, I think that the height of sports was in the 90s, from a
Yeah.
basketball standpoint and baseball and, things like that. And in the 90s was really a height of, in my opinion, that was the height of basketball. And so, fortunate to grow up in that time and have those people surround me and just help me drive
Yeah.
success on the athletic side. So
At least professional NBA basketball. I have trouble watching it now. I'd rather watch
it's
college basketball all day long.
yeah, if that the college game is changing, right? It's
Yeah.
evolving to something to where, I'm fortunate enough to have a couple kids that are getting recruited and, borderline Division I kids now that I'm coaching right now. And man, the landscape has changed. It is, you watch the Final Four and then, if you're not going to be, unless you're an anomaly like a Cooper Flag, you're not
Yeah.
going to be playing in that game. Those, most 18-year-old, 19-year-old kids can't compete at that level. They're
Right.
25, 26 years old. They're grown men. And if you watch the Final Four, it was a
Hmm.
grown men's game. And pretty much the coaches rolled out the basketball and said, "Hey, let's go to war."
Yep. Yep.
And that's what we watched. But I agree with you, Conrad. The NBA game for me is it's challenging, and it's two types of different basketball. The NBA is a very isolated basketball court, and what the common fan who doesn't go to the NBA game, they don't realize how big the paint is
Hmm.
of the NBA court. It's
Yep.
massive, and
Yes.
and you can't have guys sitting in there anymore. And it's isolation. There's no really help side defense, and But the college game, I think, is just. I'm a little concerned about it. I'm a little concerned about the NIL stuff and how that's guys are moving back and forth and moving all around. I don't like it. I help run the collective here at Wright State, and we're paying guys 150 grand. They're just sitting here for 9 months and they're heading out.
Yep.
And that's not what we thought it would be like, but it's
Mhm.
definitely the NIL stuff is definitely going to change the landscape, and the Power Four is going to be the beneficiary of it. The
Yep.
mid majors are going to get cooked in the process. There's not going to be a lot of Cinderella teams anymore in that
Right.
Final Four, and that's the concerning part that the college game that I see.
It is. And that's, just like Nico from Tennessee, the quarterback.
Yeah.
Well, now you got college players that are going to learn how to hold out for more money.
Yeah, I think the NCAA has. I mean, they have the ability to stop it.
Yes.
And my
Yes.
thoughts. So I think the NCAA said, hey, you have 5 years to play for, no matter what. You
Yep.
get one free transfer if your coach leaves, but other than that, if you transfer, you got to sit out a year.
Yep. I agree.
And I think that there's some limitations they can put on it. But however, the cat's out of the bag. It's like trying to put toothpaste back in the tube, and it just
Yep.
I don't know if it's possible now. They
Yep.
just let the Wild Wild West happen, and so
Yep.
this is where we're at.
And a lot of those kids, this is generational money to them.
Hmm.
And now that they've got a taste of it, hopefully, uh, a lot of those kids, money can, especially when you've never had it, it can
Right.
make you go sideways quick.
Hmm.
Yeah,
There's
yeah,
vultures out
that's
there, man.
yeah. And now the teams have general managers and there's agents involved and things like that. It's I don't blame the athlete, right? I don't blame the athlete.
Right.
It's wild when I was playing, at Wright State, we we had to report to the NCAA how much money we made on the year from a personal working standpoint, like what our W-2 might be, and it was only I think it was only maxed out like $3,000. Like we couldn't make more than $3,000 for the year, and if you don't come from a family that has money.
Right.
The stuff that, your per diems and your thing that you're getting now, we got full rides and, we wore all team issued gear, they did our laundry for us. But still you like to go out and, go out to a movie every once in a while, go out to a club and, but, we just, if you didn't have the fortune of somebody's family, giving you some money that way, you really couldn't work. You could work on campus for maybe for a couple of hours and,
Right.
refereeing or something, but it was not any money. It's always felt like, this whole thing, if when Ed O'Bannon sued the NCAA for, name, image, and likeness, I think when he did that, if they just would have came out and said, hey, we're going to give every athlete $2,000 a month.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think we're in this situation, but
They would have still thought they were rich.
Oh man, $2,000 a month, I'd have been like,
Yeah.
that'd have been, it would have been enough, and I think they have enough money to do that NCAA, but those are just my thoughts on it. But
What do you think of the 3-point shooting in the championship? I was like, I think Florida was shooting 25% from behind the arc, and Houston had 24% behind the arc. It was a different look to me because what's sexy in basketball now is hitting it from the logo.
well, there's a couple of thoughts of that, and because and we deal with our high school kids, and so I do some color commentary for Spectrum Sports on top of my other things that I do. So I actually called I used to do the Wright State games and did some ESPN work for them too, but recently I just did the girls state championship here in Ohio, and I did the boys semi-state finals at Wright State. Uh, what happens is these teams aren't used to playing in that type of venue, right? So, when you go from an arena, the shooting and the depth perception changes, and you really got to try to figure out what your eyes, get your eyes adjusted to those things, right? So with them being like a pretty much a dome type setting, for lack of better words, that whole perception changes how the court's laid out and how it's elevated, and there's the backdrop is nothing. It's almost like you're trying to shoot the ball into the middle of the ocean. So it's like when you're in the gym and you're working on your game in the gym, and then you go to the park, and all of a sudden it's just a whole different feel because the backdrop is different. And so you put that in there with it, and then also the anxiety and the level of a game. When there's a poor shooting performance on the championship game or a Final Four, I don't ever give that a lot of weight, just because there's so many factors that are going into that piece of it. And just from one, there's a lot on the line. There's a lot, especially now there's, players, you're in the championship game and you have a decent game, 10 to 12 points, all of a sudden that could get you $1 million the next year.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
so
right.
there's a little anxiety on that piece of it. So
Yeah.
the shooting, I thought of it. What I thought was interesting is that there wasn't a lot of. I mean, there was some coaching there. There were some sets, but it was more like I said. They rolled the ball out and let the big boys just go play, and
Yeah.
that was more shocking to me with those guys, coaching against each other. That's what I thought.
I just want to tell you, man, I appreciate that because that's a perspective I would have never have thought about.
Yeah, yeah, I've been there, done it. It's challenging to get that adjustment when you're in a game. And that's what when I called the high school games. These kids are used to playing in a high school game, and they go to University of Dayton Arena, UD Arena, or Wright State, and it's a different piece. And being at Wright State, the East Side Rim. That when I played there used to be, the Wright State's the Nutter Center holds like 12,000 people. UD Arena holds around 14, 15. But on the Wright State side, that on the East Side Rim, there used to be bleachers that would go from the floor all the way to the top concourse. And it was, it might have been 50, 60, 70 rows up there. But now those bleachers aren't there. It's just a blank wall. And
Oh,
so it's,
yeah.
yeah, I'm telling you, when you're trying to shoot at that rim, I mean, it's challenging.
Mhm.
It's challenging. Now you magnify that into a dome setting, right?
Yeah.
To where it's just, you're in a football dome and all of a sudden the backdrop is so far away.
Well, and that's just like, whether it's a high school team or college team, you're going into an arena like this. You get what, one day of practice for 2 hours in this facility?
Yeah,
Well,
I
like
mean
you
the high
said,
school the high school teams don't get anything, so they really haven't struggled much. But that Final Four, there, and it's different too when you put the fans in it too. Like I
yeah,
mean, that's
yep.
so you're shooting into an empty arena. It's
Mhm.
it's definitely a different sound, but it's an incredible sound. Like I'll tell you, when we'd go play at Hinkle Fieldhouse and we'd go play at Butler, and you're just in there bouncing the ball yourself. Talk about some historic, just chilling,
Uh-huh.
like just some really cool stuff, going through your body at that time. But so that, but amplify that into a dome.
Yeah.
It's a neat sound when you're in there by yourself and it just happening. So they get a
Uh,
little bit of time, but they don't get enough.
right, right. Now, interesting question here. So you play high school basketball in Indiana. You go to college and play in Ohio. You've coached Ohio basketball. Is there a big difference between the states in
That's a
basketball?
massive difference. Massive
Is there
difference.
really?
Yeah. When I was in Virginia, I was a principal in Virginia, and our team actually went to the state finals. And I didn't coach officially, but I would go to practice and I work the guys out, and I helped their head coach. And we went down. We lost in the crazy game. So it's a smaller school, rural area, and but one of those classes that just came through that had a good class of
Yep.
athletes, and they
Yep.
got to the state finals, and so we're down two with like 1.4 seconds. Actually, we're up one. Yeah, we're up one, like 3 seconds to go. They call a foul. Kids get and one, or not and one, a 1-on-1. He knocks down both free throws, and so we have a timeout. Call a timeout, and like there's less than 3 seconds to go. We draw up a play for our point guard coming across underneath the foul line, try to angle up the sideline. He gets it and takes one dribble and just lets it fly, and he hits the shot. Right, we are going absolute bananas because he just hit a three-quarter court three to go up two and win the game. The referees blew their whistle and called it off. They said the clock started too early.
Oh.
So these kids lost the state championship on a whistle that the clock started too early. So that was a tough one there, but they're good athletes there, and it was a little bit different. And then Virginia, they have a parochial versus private or
Oh, really? Okay.
public school. They have their separate divisions there.
Okay.
And then Ohio, there's a couple good gyms here. There's it's okay. It's and Ted, it's a good question because I tried to, when I came back, when I saw you there, when the school honored me in that for the silver anniversary team,
Mhm.
you know, I I was fortunate to come in on a Friday night, and it was Madison Grant. I was Ole Miss, and I was thinking like, all right, this is going to be a pretty decent crowd. It was always a crowd that was very very good. Rival game, and so I was shocked at how limited the crowd was, and then too from a talent standpoint, it was the school that my son goes to or I coach at. We're like the fourth largest high school in the state, and so we have about I think we have about the graduating classes are about 800, 850
Man,
apiece. Yeah, so
wow.
it's massive. So um, you know, there's a lot of talent that comes through,
Hmm.
and we play in the toughest conference in Ohio, Southwest or the Greater Western Ohio Conference. There's a team called Centerville that comes out of here, Gabe Cups, that plays at
Uh,
IU. He comes
yep.
out, his dad was a coach there and legendary coach. And so we play against some high level teams. So when I got back to Ole Miss, I was looking to see kind of where that level was. And, and they're okay, but, it's just not, from the talent level that I saw from, you know, essentially what would be what was Mississinewa 4A
Right.
at the 4A, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, like, our high school team would have done some numbers around them.
Really.
Yeah,
Wow.
but it just kind of where you're at, right? It's just pockets,
Right.
it's class. We had a really really good class this year, and so I mean, it was just kind of one of those things too. But the gym setting is the biggest thing for me. It's
Yep.
we don't go to a lot of big gyms. I'm like some of our gyms here, like they're just smaller. But
Right.
but I'm still biased to Indiana basketball. I think the support behind Indiana basketball is different, but football here is a different story.
Oh
Football,
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
football here is it's loaded here. So
Yeah, it is, and that's. But speaking of the silver anniversary team, we wanted to congratulate you again on that, and I wanted to ask you a couple questions about that. Let's go with the two-part question, okay?
all right.
What was that experience at that banquet, and did you run into any players you played against or coaches you played for or against?
Well, I mean, the experience and the honor to that is man, it's tough to get into, right?
Hmm.
It's
Yeah,
a
yeah,
tough one. Not to mention our class. That class of 2000 was loaded, not only for
yep.
basketball but for football too.
Oh yeah,
Because
oh
that
yeah.
was an option for me. That was a chance for me to, I could have played football too. And
Right.
but on the basketball side of things, man, we just, it was a class loaded with, Jared Jeffries, Zach Randolph, both NBA guys, and you had Shane Power who played at Mississippi State, and um, um, Austin Parkinson played at
Hmm.
Purdue. Brett Busher
Purdue.
played at Purdue, and Austin's coaching the Butler women's basketball team. They were in the elite. They were the Sweet 16 NCAA tournament this year. Um, I mean, it was great to catch up with those guys, and the reason that I feel it was so neat is because a lot of parents put this pressure on kids about going to play Division I basketball or
Right.
college sports and things like that, and the real lesson to the I think the biggest lesson to sports in general is just time management, self discipline, competitive adversity, dealing with adversity, those types of things. And when I bring that up, because when you look at the guys that I was with and all these guys that we played against each other, each other, Mickey McGill was there, and um, um, other guys, but they're all dads. They're all husbands. They're dads. They're average Joes that are working, and some
Yep.
of them are doing big stuff, and from making a wish foundation, things like that. It just but most all of us are just normal people,
Right.
contributing to society, and probably have had some success, maybe at a higher level, just because we've dealt with a lot of those situations.
Hmm.
Um, but you know, seeing their success from where they are, where they started, and where they're at, running businesses, CEOs, things like that. Zach wasn't there, Jared Jeffries wasn't there. Zach has a podcast. I follow his stuff a little bit. And, we had texted each other prior to the event. Just checking in on each other. But yeah, it was an interesting piece. Coach McPherson, his wife Lori made it down. It was really important to me.
Yep.
Herb and Lori were both big proponents of helping me get into that, or getting honored with that award. And seeing Coach come down. He's recently had, a couple different surgeries on his hips and his knees, and
Yep.
he's getting older. But man, he's in the Hall of Fame, and Bill Hahn was in the Hall of Fame. Jack Colescott. Man, I mean, what guy can say that I had three Hall of Fame coaches in high school?
Exactly.
Like, you
Yeah.
know what I mean? It just.
Mhm.
You want to talk about, all the cards, people can always say, hey, I was dealt a bad hand, but man, when I look at my athletic background, man, I was dealt a good hand of cards with the
Yep.
people in my life, between
Right.
Adrian Ritchie, my freshman year, and taking a chance on me there, starting me. And, but it was neat. My AAU coach was there when I played for Spies, Jim Rantz. We won the national championship in '99. He was there. And man, it was sold out. 1,200 people were in attendance,
Wow.
and just some guys that actually were getting inducted to the Hall of Fame. The old coach from Anderson was there, and Troy Lewis from Centerville actually lives right here. We coach against each other
Oh,
here
really?
in
Okay.
Ohio. But Troy Lewis played at Purdue, and man, was just an absolute dog. I mean,
Yep.
was an Anderson guy,
Yep.
and was
Yep.
Mr. Basketball.
Mhm.
But he was a lot of fun. He had a couple older brothers that played in the Wigwam, and when he was
Yep.
there, played in the Wigwam, and those Anderson Marion battles were always
Oh, yeah.
the height of basketball, and
Yep.
some of the best ever, and so um, he was there in the Hall of Fame, just hearing their stories and what they were able to do and what they were able to accomplish with their families and his success. And it's neat that he's right around the corner. We get to, talk
Very
Indiana
cool.
basketball here and there. So, but yeah, it was just, my wife and daughter were able to go. My other kids were all tied up. So, but I was glad to have them there and support me in that piece of it. But yeah, it was a neat event, a great honor. The Indiana Basketball Hall of Fame, man, it was great. And the one piece that I loved about Indiana basketball or Mississinewa basketball here in the Indiana Hall of Fame, they have a section, they have a little piece, a little article. There is a handwritten bracket that has the 1954 state championship
Oh, boy.
uh, uh, tournament on it, right? And it's all handwritten. And you can see Milan's coming in from the south bracket, and on the north side, we lose to Muncie Central.
Yep.
I think Muncie Central, maybe no, maybe it's Elkhart. I can't remember what Mississippi was like, kind of in that semi-state area, like
Semi-state,
like
yeah.
regionals,
Yep.
yeah, right there to get to that state championship game that year. So that was pretty neat. And then to my grandfather was the athlete of the family, and he was really good friends with Bobby Plum. And so
Really?
my grandfather lived down in Milan before he passed away. He that's where he kind of lived most of his life, down in Lawrenceburg and Milan. And so I got to meet Bobby Plum at the Legion. They were buddies, and yeah, so it was neat. It was a neat experience. Kind of tie all that into the Indiana basketball. They've done a really good job with it. The new expansion and new addition there. They've done a really nice job. But got to see Herb's induction there. Got to see the late Bill Hahn. He passed away recently, and Jack Colescott's photos in there too. So pretty neat.
Well, it's interesting you brought up 1954 because Wilbur Webb just passed away over the weekend, and he was a member of that team.
Wilbur Webb.
Yeah.
So Wilbur Webb actually took out a sponsorship for me and the banquet book. So
really
hate that that's happened, but that's neat. That's neat that he was able to do that for me. But sorry for that loss, because I know he was a Mississinewa, Gas City, Jonesboro basketball historian. He's somebody that just really was dedicated to the history of the game.
Yep.
In Grant County. So
lived on that same street, Main Street in Jonesboro, forever.
Yeah.
And that's
that's a legend, a Gas City legend there.
Yeah, and but that's then you mentioned something earlier about Coach Ritchie, which we had him on a couple months ago, and
that was a fun podcast.
That was a fun one with him, and he had mentioned that you had been up there recently and hung out with Nate for a little bit, but he had a lot of good things to say about you.
Adrian was, man, he was special. Adrian was special, and he had that had Conrad's group coming through there with Simpkins and Skeens and those guys, and and those guys that we looked up to, because Adrian was there, and he had brought Nate to Gas City his 7th grade year and actually held Nate back to play with our class. It was, he had a lot of belief in our class. But
Yeah.
he'd go around and coach AAU, man. I'll tell you, talk about somebody who got me ready for what college sports was going to be like. He was as intense as it got.
Yep.
I remember one time we were practice with Adrian, and Adrian, he was upset that we were not getting the job done. And he took a basketball. He kicked the basketball against the walls, like just for like 10 minutes while we were running sprints. He'd just kick it around and just kick it and kick it and kick it. And one time we were at an AU tournament, and this is middle school, and I think we lost one game. Our class lost one game in middle school all year. I think it was to one of the Marion middle schools. But we were at an AU game somewhere coming back, and he was pissed about what we played. Man, he probably won't appreciate me telling the story because he's
I shared my story.
Yeah, but he punched that windshield and cracked out while we're driving down the road. Man. But it was funny. I was I was able to earn the starting varsity quarterback job at Mississinewa, right? And so
Right.
Purdue was pretty heavily recruiting me as my freshman year.
Mhm.
Coach Tiller was down at the Alamo Bowl, called me from there, and I was pretty excited about football. Basketball was coming around, and I didn't know if I was even going to play. To be honest with you, I had so much success, that my freshman year of football, and so switch gears, Swanners in my ears, I'm like, hey, I'm gonna give it a run because I thought football was my ticket. I thought that was going to be it. And then, so I remember I was actually at Swanner's house the night before our first game, and I had no idea where my role was, what it was going to be. And you open the paper the next morning that said the probable starters. The Grant County's always done a great great job of covering sports, local sports, and I saw my name in the starting lineup in there, and I was shocked because Nate and I both started our freshman year. Nick Veter was the only senior, Brandon was a junior there, and I can't remember who the other starter was. Maybe Ryan Riggs, maybe something like that. And so getting to our first piece of it, Adrian took a big risk on me. He cut a lot of seniors that year. Probably ultimately ended his job there by cutting all those seniors because he left Nick Feeder and Todd Harris and Josh Millsball were the only 3 seniors. He ut the rest of them, and started the freshmen. And we ended up going 500 that season. With 3 freshmen. I think Jake, Nate, and myself were playing a lot of varsity minutes as freshmen. We ended up going 500, but it took a big risk, and so. I owe a lot to him because he was another father figure to me. He put 3 kids through Division I basketball, but he was, man, I'll tell you, he was great. He was a great coach. He's a great person. We still talk, text message each other, but he's somebody who's influential in my life too. Really, a lot of care for him, and Nate and I still stay in touch and talk. So he's like a brother to me too.
And you mentioned playing quarterback as a freshman. There's only been a couple of you guys at Mississinewa that ever played quarterback as a freshman, which that's impressive right there. But I'm going way back. I'm going back to 3-way wreck. I'm trying to think. Were you on the Jets? Right?
Man, you are bringing it way back.
With Steve Woodcock and Brian Swanners as coaches.
Yeah. So, here's the thing with that's great. Steve Woodcock. So we had talked on Twitter a couple of years ago, and I've stayed in touch with him a little bit, but I haven't talked to him in a long time. But but the thing is, I was on the Jets, right? And I was a center. I was the center because I was too tall. I weighed too much to run the football, right? And so Woodcocks and I remember one time Steve Woodcocks, we had practice at the park, and Steve Woodcocks he forgot the footballs. Right? We're going to football parties without a football, so we had to use a roll of paper towel as the football. But that was good. But yeah, him and Brian, kind of started that football career with me, and then then I went on to. I think I went to the Steelers with we were loaded at Steelers because Greg Simmons was our coach at that
Yep.
time, and
Yep.
it was me, Brennan Simmons, and Brody Burbank. We
Burbank,
were
yep.
we were the backfield, and Greg Simmons played semi-pro football.
Right.
Greg is like a dad to me. Greg,
Yep.
Brennan's a blood brother for me, and
Yep.
he was always my ride or die, and then Greg was that father figure. I mean, I spent more hours at their house than I ever did my own, and they paid for meals, paid for clothes, and
Right.
but Greg, drafted me, whatever you want to call it. I know he probably finagled that a little bit. Said, "Hey, this kid lives at my house, so I'm gonna be taking him back and forth to practice."
Yeah.
But he showed me how to be a quarterback. He played for the Kokomo Mustangs, the semi-pro football team over there. So Brennan and I were the ball boys for that team. Rod Woodson's brother was on that team. And talk about a maniac. That was Rod Woodson's brother was a maniac. And but yeah, Greg showed me how to be quarterback. I remember being in the backyard at his in-laws and just showing me a quarterback cadence and dropbacks and stuff like that. So that's kind of where the quarterback thing started. And then middle school we kind of took off. I think we only lost one game in middle school. We had a pretty solid class.
Yeah, you guys did. That's like, I mean, like I say, football, basketball, you had a very good baseball career. Just, from my research, I can remember your senior year, you averaged 22 points a game, 10.1 rebounds a game, 2.3 assists, 2 steals. Herb was your coach your senior year.
Ted's hyping you up, man.
So, in 4 years, 4 years of high school varsity basketball, 1,507 points, which is number 2 behind Herb.
Yeah.
That's pretty impressive. AP honorable mention All-State. Member of the North-South Indian All-Star team, the Classic, top 40 workout, and three-time first team All-Conference. Very impressive. We's always proud of you.
Yeah, here's what I always say. I told Herb this too. I said the reason I never broke the record is because he wouldn't let me. He controlled my shots. Right.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah.
Right. So
that makes sense.
I had, Mickey McPherson had the school record 61. I had 42 against Eastbrook my senior year. I didn't play the fourth quarter. But I say that about Herb. His comeback to that was, if I had a 3-point line, you wouldn't even be close.
Yeah, you're probably right.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, here's the thing, Ted. All those stats, they're great. They're great. And I'll tell you, I never knew how many points I ended with a game. I never knew.
Yep.
I never knew. It wasn't important to me. I loved to win, but man, ultimately, I just loved competing out there.
Yeah.
Like that's all it was. I love to be on the court. I love to battle with, against guys, and I wanted to, enforce my will, over somebody. And, I didn't know I was close, to be honest with you.
Right.
Until, halfway through. And, I look at it and I was like, I probably could have, broke that record if I really knew what was there and knew it was, but I had no idea.
Yeah.
But man, the history behind some of this basketball stuff that we had in Mississinewa with Ronnie Horn and Larry Hedden and Mickey McPherson and Coach McPherson, he's a Murray State Hall of Famer.
Yeah.
And I think he's still like maybe number 6 on the all-time scoring list. And that's when they couldn't play as a freshman. And Murray State is no ordinary mid-major. They've put their teams into the tournament, significant amount of times. They've had a lot of talent come through there. John Morant, is a Murray racer, and for Herb to still be the number 7. You knew that. I think both him and Ronnie and Larry all drafted to the NBA when out of college, and just a lot of history there. But man, just to be in that same category mentioned as those guys, they all came before me, and I'm a history guy. I like the history of the game. I like history stuff, and for them to be in front of me and just be where they're at, man, it's been amazing just to be just in the same category as some of those guys, but just phenomenal piece of basketball history.
And like you mentioned earlier, better people. They're better people.
Yeah, they're great people. Yeah,
like
great people.
We're proud of you, man.
I'm trying, man. I'm trying to pay it forward. That's the reason I coach. I never thought I was going to be a high school coach. I had the opportunity to be an assistant at Wright State when I got done. I graduated. My senior year, I didn't play. I fractured my sternum my senior year at Wright State. And
Yep.
so I had to sit out the whole year. And we had a new coach. I was out with Ed Schilling, who's now the
Hmm.
Pepperdine. Out in Malibu with him in August, and got to catch up with him. Really, really neat. Rod Foster, UCLA, and
Hmm.
was out there. And but then I had Paul Biancardi. Paul does
Right.
the top ESPN recruiting stuff, and so I had him my senior year. But the kind of writing was on the wall. I was tired of being injured, living in the training room, so I felt it was kind of time for me to retire. But they wanted me back for another year. They wanted me to redshirt because I was as a starter my senior year before the season started. Before I broke my sternum, I was starting, and then they wanted me to come back, but I was just ready to give it up and
Yep.
get on a different path. But man, I tell you, the coaching, I would put my coaching tree up there with anybody's. I
Oh
mean, I
yeah.
really would.
It's
But and
amazing.
the challenge, I was talking this. We had our high school banquet yesterday. I was talking about this. We had, or I had 5 coaches in 8 years.
Wow.
5 coaches in
That's,
8 years.
and now these people are getting them a different coach every year.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's to think that you have to go through that vocabulary change, and
Yep.
the college level is so much more extensive of philosophy change and things like that. The
Right.
college level is a little bit more challenging to make that change. High school is a little bit easier, but
Yep.
yeah, college level making that change is pretty difficult. Pretty difficult.
It is.
So
It is.
Well, man, I just want to say thank you, and I appreciate you taking the time today.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. It's been an honor, and Gas City always is going to have a special place in my heart. And there's a lot of great people there that um, just really helped me succeed, and you know, forever grateful to have them in my life and the friendships that I had and built. And we all go on our way as we get older, and
Yep.
things kind of change and move forward. So, but yeah, it was definitely a blessing to be from Gas City, Indiana. So,
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
next time you're in town, get a hold of us.
yeah.
We'll go out to dinner.
We got a fridge full of beer.
that sounds good. That sounds good. I'm definitely interested in that. So I don't get home much just because my schedule
Right.
is so crazy.
Yeah.
I'd love to get back more. I don't talk to my dad about every other week, but that's I don't get back in town. So
Right.
hopefully once my kids get a little bit older, then slow down my travels a little bit and
Yep.
get back in town and see some of those guys. So we'll be in touch.
Thanks, buddy. And
Yep.
just
All right.
keep doing what you're doing.
Absolutely. I appreciate it, guys. Thanks for
Appreciate
having me
it.
on.
All right. Thanks, buddy.
Enjoy. All right.
See you
See
guys
ya.
later.
All right. See you. Bye.